Here we've got pocket 10s and the under the gun straddle. Under the gun +1 opens to 60. I call, the flop comes Jack 10 deuce with 2 diamonds, we have middle set. I check to the pre-flop aggressor, he bets 80. This is a standard spot to check raise, we get the second nuts. The issue is that there are a ton of bad cards that can come on the turn, which might make it tough to play out of position if I raise and get called. Take a slightly different approach, and I flat the 80. If I can get a good card, I'll check raise the turn instead. My hand will be very well disguised. If a bad card comes, like the king of diamonds, the pot will be smaller, and I can get the showdown cheaper out of position. The turn is obviously the king of diamonds. It's about the worst card in the deck. I'm losing to any flush, ace queen, queen nine, pocket kings, and pocket jacks. Went from having the second nuts to having something much worse than that. I check, the player checks back. The river is another 10. We have quads in one of the biggest games I've ever played. The problem is that I'm not sure what the player will have that he'll be able to call a bet with after he checked the turn. I check to him, hoping that he somehow slow played a strong hand and will be able to bet, or will attempt to bluff with something weak. Nope. He checks back, I turn over the 4 10s, he shows that he had queen jack offsuit with no diamond. There's probably a little bit more money we could have made, but I'm not sure how much.
So you make the minimum.
A few orbits later, we have pocket 4s on the button. We had a set with him earlier, maybe we can make another one. I raised to 30, small blind calls, he's a new player at the table. We're heads up, the flop comes ace 5-3, it's tough to make a set every time, and we obviously don't make one here. We actually make quads. The real flop is ace 4-4. I'm hitting tons of huge hands this session. Poker's lots of fun today. Small blind checks. The board isn't that connected. I don't want to scare off the opponent by betting in case he doesn't have an ace. I check back. The turn is the king of hearts. At least there's some more draws out there. It gets better because the opponent bets 50. Out of respect, take a moment of silence for the opponent since he's drawing dead. This is also a good time for you to hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you do, I'll tell you what happens next. That was very cool of you. Thanks a lot. Okay, I raised to 130. Please don't fold, dude. He doesn't. He makes the call. I hope that he gets whatever he needs, whether it's a heart or some other big card. The river is the 8 of clubs. No draws get there. Not ideal. The small blind checks. It's very unlikely that my opponent will be able to call a bet of any sort. I put out 340, hoping that the dude will have an ace and he'll think I'm trying to get him off a chop, or perhaps he'll think that I'm bluffing with a hand like Jack 10 of hearts. I'm gonna let you guys in on a little secret. I'm not bluffing. I have it. Small blind thinks just long enough for it to appear like he has a real decision before folding.
Pre-flop quads on that one.
This one. I'm excited. The table's excited. I'm running good. On to the next table, and shortly after taking my seat, I pick up pocket aces under the gun. I open to 15. Under the gun +1 calls, the button calls, the small blind calls, and the big blind calls. Everyone's trying to ruin my day. It's going to be tough though, because we flop what is referred to as quads. That's right, not just clickbait, it actually happened. Wouldn't do you like that. Checks to me, I want to get maximum value, so I bet 300. This bet looks weird, but it's designed to look weird. There's no other way to get paid when you flop a hand this strong. You have to hope one of your opponents either doesn't believe you and calls light, or drilled the flop too. With 4 other players involved, there's a good chance I'm up against somebody who wants to get on the vlog and is going to call light, or who has pocket 5s. Just kidding. Sorry to waste a lot of you guys' time. That didn't really happen. I did flop quads, but I checked the flop. So did everybody else. The turn is a jack. There are 2 clubs out there now. Checks to me again. This time I bet 15. It's a tiny bet. I'm hoping to get calls from really weak hands, or perhaps induce a bluff. Under the gun +1 calls and the small blind calls as well. Not sure what their plan is for the river, but I'm looking forward to seeing it. Dealer puts out another 5, which is a great card. Small blind checks. I bet 50. Under the gun +1 surprisingly raises to 125. The small blind folds. It's back on me. I'm hoping that somehow the opponent has a 5th ace. I re-raise to 300. The opponent folds. I table my hand. Eventually, the player reveals that he had 6-5 of hearts. We end up getting a great run out and win close to the maximum. I've got pocket 6s under the gun. I raise to 15. Middle position player calls. Cutoff calls. The big blind also calls. We go 4 ways to the flop. The dealer puts out queen 6-6. We flop quad 6s. It's been quite a while since I've done that. The big blind checks. I'm almost overwhelmed with excitement and become more concerned with getting my camera out without drawing too much attention to myself, so I check. Luckily, no one seems to pay attention to it, even though they're all aware that I wasn't planning on filming today. The player in middle position bets 35. The cutoff calls, the big blind folds, I've got the nuts, I'm worried about absolutely nothing. With a dry board out there, I call it a trap. The turn is a 10, I check, the player in middle position bets 75. Get the sense that he's trying to rep a 6. Obviously he doesn't have one. The cutoff calls. He may have a queen. I don't want to scare off either opponent, especially if the middle position player is bluffing. The river is an ace. It's mostly a bad card because it may seem to the other players in the hand like I have ace queen or aces. There's some chance that one of the other players has ace queen though, which would be great, or somehow king jack or ace x of spades. I check, middle position checks. He's the one that I was really hoping would go for it. The cutoff disappointingly also checks.
Quads.
It wasn't quite the pot that I was hoping for. Still, it's a pretty good one. I'm up 1,300 at the high point. Now some of you might be thinking, oh wow, you won with a set of aces. Not very impressive. It's easy to win when you're holding cards that good. For those people, you're not going to like this next hand. We get pocket aces again. This time we're in the big blind. A player in middle position opens at 30. I have no idea why he decided to raise when I have pocket aces. I can only speculate that he's involved in some kind of Brewster's Millions type of scenario in which he has to squander a fortune, and this is his attempt to gamble away 5% of that right now. We're lucky enough to be in a spot to take advantage of this. I raised to 120, making it much easier for the middle position player to lose quicker so that he can focus on running for mayor. Of course, the opponent calls. We're heads up out of position, and the flop comes ace jack 9 rainbow. We've got top set again. There are a variety of ways that the middle position player could have connected. I down bet to 100. The middle position player calls. Maybe he has a jack or possibly even a set of jacks. He could also have a hand like king queen suited. I'm feeling pretty good about what we've got, but we already had a set of aces in this session. 3 aces isn't cool anymore. You know what's cool? 4 aces. We've got quads in a 3-bet pot. The only issue is that it's going to be really tough to make money unless our opponent has pocket jacks or is willing to turn a hand like king queen or queen 10 into a bluff. I give him some rope with a check. We don't get the player to bite. He checks back. The river is the 6 of diamonds. It's a complete blank. I don't see how I'll be able to make much money on this board given how it's been played. I'm not going to overbet this. Instead, I make a tiny bet of 50 to make it look like a blocker bet. This will certainly get a call to someone holding a jack or even a 9, but what I'm really hoping to do with this sizing is induce a bluff from a missed straight draw. I want to appear as if I'm afraid of being beat, and I'm naming my price. Instead of raising, the opponent calls. We turn over the nuts for the win.
I would have called up to about $1.50.
Yeah.
It's an interesting situation that doesn't come up that often when you actually have too good of a hand and you're trying to get max value. I'm glad to at least have gotten an extra 50. The opponent would later tell me that he had a jack. It's great to run this good. We're up about $12.50 on the day. The very next hand, we're dealt pocket 8s on the button. The nemesis, who shoved on us the previous 2 hands that we've gone over, completely disregards my advice to run and hide. He limps in from under the gun +1. The cutoff raises to 40. I call. The action's on the big blind, who slow rolled me earlier. We've already determined that he doesn't like the amount 40. He does what he wants.
Benny.
No, we get
It's 4 of those.
It's 40.
4 of those.
Really?
4.
Easy, please. Easy. Please.
Yeah, boy.
We've got quite the cast of characters here. I feel like we're in poker's version of SNL's Jeopardy, and the big blind is Sean Connery. Under the gun +1 calls, so both players that I have to get revenge on are in there. We're going 4 ways to the flop in position. The big blind emphatically checks dark. The dealer puts out king 8-6 with 2 clubs. We flop middle set in a multi-way pot. Under the gun +1 checks. Cutoff checks. This is such a great situation. I bet 110. The big blind gets the chip denominations wrong, but ultimately gets the right amount out there, and he does it just for me.
1 and 10. Just for the blue eye.
The other player that I need to crush, min raises to 220, is the second hand in a row that he's raised me on the flop, and the 3rd time in the last 15 minutes. The cutoff folds. I'm going to try and get as much money in now as possible. I re-raised to 500. The big blind isn't afraid. He makes the call. Under the gun +1 only has 640 total, yet he calls as well and leaves himself with 140 behind. This is already a massive pot. There are so many cards that I won't be happy to see. The 8 of hearts is not one of them. We drill quads with piles of money in the middle. Both players are likely drawing dead. The big blind checks. Under the gun +1 jams for his remaining 140. This actually puts me in kind of a weird spot. I want to extract as much money as I can out of the big blind since he has about $13.50 in his stack, but I don't want to raise so much that he folds. In a multi-way pot, after I 3-bet on the flop and put in a raise on the turn when someone has already shoved, my line is going to look a lot like I have a boat. So I'd expect the big blind to fold to larger sizings, knowing that if he has ace-5 of clubs, for instance, that he likely won't have any outs. I grabbed my yellow bird to release it back in the wild where it belongs, but I only bet 500 of it to milk him, build up a side pot, and entice a call or potentially a bluff if the big blind decides a trip 8s is a good hand for him to rep. The opponent slides in a call, there's a significant side pot that takes some time for the dealer to sort out. I suppose there's a tiny chance that the big blind has a king, there's a much better chance that he has clubs. I'm rooting for one on the river. The dealer puts out the 7 of hearts. The entire pot is going to us eventually, it's just a matter of whether or not the rest of the big blind stack will be included in it. He checks, I've only got one move that makes sense. I shove for 850 effective. The big blind must have had a draw. He almost immediately folds. We turn over the quads. I'm excited to show everybody and win the pot, especially since things haven't been going particularly well for me over the previous 10 sessions or so. Looks like we're back to moving in the right direction, and the other players at the table are very cool about it.
You got 2 pairs, 8 and 8, 2 pairs. That's damn good hand. I like that hand.
The yellow bird is returned to us, and the rest of the chips in the middle follow soon after. The sweet old man didn't run and hide. My patience to wait for a better spot pays off. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster, but we're up about 2,500 on the session. Next we've got pocket queens on the button. Under the gun +2 raises to 25. He's been a real wild card. The player in middle position calls. This is the 3rd time we've gotten queens tonight. We're gonna make him count. I 3-bet to 100. The player on our left basically snap calls despite only having 130 behind. Note that this is a different player than the person who slow played aces against us earlier. Under the gun +2 calls, the middle position player calls. We're somehow in another 4-way 3-bet pot with pocket queens. We won't be hitting a set on the turn though. We hit it right on the flop. It comes queen 6-3 with 2 hearts. We currently have the best hand possible. The small blind checks. Under the gun +2 doesn't care who the pre-flop aggressor was. He shows us who's boss by betting 200. The player in middle position folds. I don't want to scare off the under the gun +2 player. He probably has a flush draw. As long as the heart doesn't come on the turn, I'll make a move at that point. We'll be last act anyway, so we won't have to worry about it checking through on the turn. I call the 200. The small blind doesn't have enough in his stack to call the full amount. He's all in for 130 total. 3 of us are still in, but I really want to stack the under the gun +2 player who started the hand with over 3,000 in front of him. The dealer puts out the deuce of hearts. It's an awful card because one of the 2 opponents almost for sure has a flush. Under the gun +2 bets 300 into almost a dry side pot. Not great, but if we're currently beat, we'll have 10 outs to make a boat or quads. I call to see if we can accomplish that goal. The river is the queen of spades, giving us 4 of a kind. Usually, I try not to brag, but there's a special occasion in which we've gotten all the ladies here and we're about to get all the money in this pot. I'm hoping that under the gun +2 has the ace-high flush or a full house, is about to do something crazy. He's wearing some LSU gear. I've seen people in LSU gear do some crazy things before, like fake southern accents as they address the student body. But there's no shenanigans now. The opponent checks. We're going to go with a large sizing to target flushes and full houses because I don't see us getting called by anything worse. I consider putting in a huge overbet jam because we'll actually never have a full house on this board after 3-betting pre-flop, and the fact that we didn't raise on the flop with top set may reduce the likelihood in the opponent's mind that we could have quads. Ripping is probably overkill. It'd be a disaster if the opponent somehow did fold a flush. I make it a more reasonable 1,500. Even this amount might be too much. It doesn't appear that under the gun +2 has a flush or a full house. He folds what he says is pocket kings. We turn over the quads to win the side pot and the main pot.
Oh, wow. It'd be hard to beat that. Yeah. You made the blow, dude. Holy crap.
Yep. Yeah.
Hey, can you give me a shout out?
We'll see. Alright, what's your name?
Philip. I go by Ray.
Ray gets absolutely destroyed by quads. He could have done it anonymously, but that's not in Ray's DNA. He prefers for you guys all to know that Philip, aka Ray, gets stacked by us towards the end of the session before we rack up and call it a night.